Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's show Ukraine, Russia, China on POT TV. My name is Sasha Star, and today we have a guest, Dr. Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Thank you, Sasha. Glad to be here as always.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. And also, our producer, Mark Lee, will help us with the show, and hopefully, you will see him rather
Popping
soon.
up any moment.
Yeah, not this very moment, but
Oh well.
some later moment. Let's
Yeah,
put it
well.
this way.
I'm a
Yeah.
I'm a patient kind of guy.
Jonathan, what do you think about the idea that United States, and of course, in the face of Donald Trump, really helps European Union countries to intensify their um, military complex, to produce actually weapons, finance it, and otherwise becoming more should I say, tangible aspect of European security overall.
Oh, I think it's an excellent idea, and it seems to be completely in accordance with President Trump's mindset, because as you know, his basic strategy appears to be economically based, with forceful diplomacy and military power. In that sense, he keeps as a last resort, and shows a willingness, and because he has shown a willingness to use military power, it also adds to deterring potentially our adversaries. So this is a reasonably good approach, and he and his administration may well codify this in a formal, shall we say, Trump doctrine, if you will, even though one has not been really formally declared as such yet, but it is in the process. And in it would actually be quite compatible with the strategy that I had suggested in the Russian View of U.S. Strategy, that the United States ought to be the world's geopolitical balancer, not empire, but the balancer. In other words, being able to prevent an adversary or an alliance of adversaries from dominating the world island, or from dominating the continent of Europe and Asia. So this would be it would be a more sustainable strategy for the United States, rather than trying to, in previous administrations, trying to effect regime change, or aggressively trying to change the regimes of nations that were not to their liking. So this is definitely a better strategy, and one that has a decent chance of working if it can be sustained. Yeah. Now, keep in mind that during the Cold War, the United States and its allies were able to execute a grand strategy, the grand strategy of containment, which was suggested by George Kennan in his 1947 article in Foreign Affairs, The Sources of Soviet Conduct. In that, basically, he stated that the West did not need to defeat the Soviet Union militarily. All they had to do was contain the Soviet Union and prevent it from achieving, either through subversion or military conquest, what it could not otherwise achieve through economic competition and ideological example. And basically, Kennan's reasoning was that eventually the Soviet Union would collapse under the internal stresses of its own, under the stresses of its own internal contradictions. And history proved that Kennan was right, and it was a sustainable strategy. And the really excellent thing about the containment strategy was that it was a strategy that both political parties could agree upon, both the Democratic Party at the time and the Republican Party. No matter which party was in power, they were both committed to executing the overall grand strategy of containment. This made it a reasonable, sustainable strategy for the Cold War. Now, in order to be successful in the post-Cold War period in the 21st century, the United States and the West have to agree upon an overall grand strategy that is sustainable for the long term, that does not involve bankrupting our respective societies through excessive military expenditures. There has to be a balance, and there has to be dominance. And we can't, for example, we cannot afford what the U.S. military has been tossing around as phrase which I don't think is a strategy at all. They want full spectrum. They say they want full spectrum dominance. That's not a strategy. Full spectrum dominance, if you really look at it hard enough, that really means more of everything is better. It does not prioritize any category of military spending. And if you don't have any priority, if everything is your priority, then nothing is your priority. So the United States has to decide upon which aspects of its military power it is going to emphasize as being decisive in becoming the world's geopolitical balancer. It has to choose. It has to make intelligent choices. It just can't simply throw money at the problem and hope that's going to be enough.
Mark, you have a question?
Yeah, I do have a question. There was a little bit of interference with Jonathan's mic as well and everything, but that wasn't the question. The question was, I did hear that there is a conversation tomorrow that's taking place in Turkey. I think Zelensky said that there's going to be some peace talks going on between Russia and Ukraine, and I was just wondering, as this is the Russia-Ukraine, the China show, whether there is any hope of there actually being kind of a peace or a ceasefire from these talks, because I did see that yesterday that these talks were going to take place on tomorrow, which is Wednesday, and everything like that. So I just wanted your take on these peace talks, and of course they're in Turkey, and I know that Turkey has had its own roles in our U.S. military. I know my dad, way back when he was stationed in the Air Force, was stationed in Istanbul, I believe, or one of the Turkish outlets and everything like that. But I do know U.S. and Turkey have had interesting relationship, and I'll just put it at that.
Yeah. Now, my take on it immediately is that as long as Russia continues to adhere to its maximalist goals, which amount to nothing more than unconditional surrender for Ukraine, then there is not going to be any result. It's just going to be more posturing on the part of Russia, and more spinning out of time. They're trying to gain more time before the United States and the West decide to impose really severe economic sanctions upon Russia, which will hurt its ability to continue the war even more. And right now, Russia is not winning any kind of operational victory on the battlefield. And there is, I still contend, there is still the potential for Ukraine, with its increasing levels of weapons and successes on the battlefield, to gain the opportunity for inflicting decisive operational defeat on the Russians. And my supposition, my contention, is that they will unleash this surprise offensive against the Kerch Bridge, cut off the Russian reinforcement and resupply to the Crimea, leaving the Russian occupiers there isolated, and that will then enable Ukraine to launch a counteroffensive against the Crimea with its assembled strategic reserves, which I'm confident they have managed to set aside forces for that purpose.
I think that this talks in Istanbul, Mark, which you just mentioned, remember that they're not being held by the leaders of both countries, neither Putin nor Zelensky. So anything, whatever will be discussed there or even agreed there, always will be subject to a cancellation by the leaders of both countries. So this is non-conclusive. This is, frankly, in the most optimistic scenario, I can't even envision anything at all what could come out of this, except that maybe they will agree to exchange of the personnel, maybe some sick people or people who need medicine help. Something like small, which is still important. I have no problem with that. If that would be achieved, that already makes a lot of sense to hold these negotiations. But I wouldn't call it negotiations, really. I mean, it's a road to nowhere. Absolutely. However, it's better to have these talks than not. I would still say that, providing that they are not spending too much time and money. If they're flying economy class to Istanbul instead of business or first class, that would be welcome news.
Save the money for ammunition.
Save money on ammunition. That makes sense. Hey, Sasha, just out of curiosity, because one of the things that I had heard about, because I do try to follow the various news, as you know, and everything like that, is that there's this notion of the anti-corruption agencies there in Ukraine, and that there's going to be this notion that there is going to be they're going to be stripped of their independence. And I know that there's been this notion of them trying to make sure that there's not corruption within the current government of Ukraine and all along those lines. So I just wanted your take on this notion, because I even saw where Bloomberg was reporting on that and some other people were reporting on that. And definitely some folks are saying that they need to have, like any kind of, even here in the U.S., people that are regulating what's going on and making sure that corruption isn't taking place and everything. But they're waiting to see whether even the President Zelensky is going to sign this into law and everything, because I guess that in the past they were independent.
I don't know really how to comment on that, because what corruption is in every single country in the world.
Right. There's no corruption-free country that can lecture to the rest of the world.
And corruption, how did you discover that corruption? Corruption about what? By whom? Is it in Western Ukraine or Eastern Ukraine or South of Ukraine? And who is doing this corruption? And what's the evidence of any corruption? So this is, again, it's leading to nowhere.
Well, apparently, some of the corruption they were saying was some of the Ukrainian agencies were actually working in conjunction with the Russian government. So there might have been
proof. Bring is the proof. Okay, if proof is there, then we can talk about some changes.
Then you're not talking about corruption. Then you're talking about treason.
Yeah, because they said that on Monday, which would have been yesterday, the authorities raided the offices of Ukraine's National Anti-Corruption Bureau. They detained at least 15 of its investigators. 2 were held on suspicion of working with Russia, but according to the Bureau, most were accused of infringements unrelated to their work, such as traffic violations. I mean, shucks, you got traffic violations with government workers here in the United States. Shucks, in Durham, North Carolina, you probably got people that got traffic violations. So it looks like they've got them on maybe 1 or 2 on some serious charges, and the rest on minor charges.
Mark, this is news which has to be investigated, acted upon one way or another, but it's not an international news that can contribute to development of the Russia-Ukrainian war. Not at all. There are some much more important factors. For example, Russians are very close to taking over Pokrovsk. And they are trying their best in all directions to increase their attacks on Ukrainians, take as much possible territories, cities, villages, whatever they can do. But in fact, interestingly enough, that during the last year and a half, with all their attacks and sacrifices, so many people lost their lives. Actually, I was surprised to find out that it's not 1 million Russians were killed, but rather 2 million. It's coming from U.S. sources, so I don't know.
My goodness, yeah,
Right?
that's more than just serious. That would be catastrophic if that's
Absolutely. So in this case, of course, support of Ukraine from the West, particularly Europe, United States, is critical. It's very important now, especially that maybe willingly or unwillingly, Trump, in fact, with this ultimatum, 50 days, I call it ultimatum simply because there is a certain actions that have to be performed by Putin and a period of time during which it has to be performed or unperformed. Depends on your situation. So in this case, he almost invited Putin. Okay, you can grab as much territory as you want. You have 50 days. Okay, 7 days already gone. So you have still 43 more days to go. Go, Putin. Vladimir, take this. Oh, you can't. So how you can pretend that you want this territory? Because you see, all those 4 provinces, they are taken over by Russians partially, not all of it, just partially. So Putin wants to take all of it without fighting. He wants Trump to say, okay, Vladimir, this is all yours, take it. But how it can be yours if you didn't actually take? So I think Putin got the message and is trying really his best to acquire complete control of this four territories. And something tells me that it's going to work out well for him. I think Ukrainians are defending very well with the minimum losses for themselves, maximum losses inflicted on Russians. And I agree with you, Jonathan, that they are preparing a very powerful counterattack. And we will see
Oh, yeah.
probably before the end of the
It's a
fifth.
matter of where and when and how decisive the attack will be, and given the Ukrainians' past performance in this war, in the war itself, the timing and the force of the attack will come as a complete surprise to observers in the West as well as to the Russians. The Ukrainians, one aspect of warfare that the Ukrainians seem to have mastered pretty well is the element of surprise.
How vital is the city of, because like I said, I've never been to Ukraine, and maybe it'll be on my wish list after this whole war ends and everything like that. But how vital is the city of Pokrovsk and everything like that? Because one of the articles in Newsweek that just came out today says that the Russian forces are inside that heavily fortified eastern Ukrainian city and everything as the ceasefire is going on. So apparently they are putting a lot of effort to going into that city and not knowing about Ukraine. I don't know the vitality of that city or how important that city is, because I have heard a lot of talk, including from you, Jonathan, about Crimea, and it seems like that Crimean attack should have happened ages ago, based on what I've heard you and others say. But how big is that city, and how vital is that city?
It's not a big city, but it's vital city, like all Ukrainian cities are vital. You cannot make the difference between Pokrovsk and Kiev, because Kiev is just vital, and Pokrovsk. The fact is that Russians, they are committing incredible manpower on all these front lines, including Pokrovsk situation. So let's see if Ukrainians have a choice to continue to defend Pokrovsk, risking losing thousands of lives of Ukrainian soldiers, or temporarily leave it, going to next line, which is fortified and could provide a much better battleground for Ukrainians, and leave it temporarily, either all Pokrovsk or part of it, whatever Russian in control of. And that's it. The preservation of manpower for Ukrainians is becoming the paramount.
And there's much to say for that in favor of that particular argument, because pulling back temporarily would give the Ukrainian production and use of drones more time to take effect and inflict even greater casualties on the Russian army, because now people reporting from the front say that the skies are dominated by the buzzing sound of drones overhead. And so it almost would remind you, if you've ever seen the 1984 movie Terminator, the original one.
Yeah, the original.
Basically that had machines and robots flying all over the places. The machines were attempting to exterminate humanity, but with all these drones flying overhead now and dominating the skies, it's starting to look like a scene out of that movie. So,
Actually, coming back to where we started, I listened out very interesting information. I'm following investments, and as you know, today was reporting from Lockheed, and their stock went down big, probably 4% or something. And but what's interesting is that if you compare for last year performance of public companies in U.S. Military complex and that one of Europe. In Europe, stocks doubled in 1 year, Rheinmetals and many other companies, and U.S. military contractors, before today's Lockheed report, they gained 1% only. Does it tell you anything?
It tells me that the U.S. is trying to throttle back on its expansion of military production, and they're trying to devote priorities to certain things, and they're trying to balance that with the other economic priorities described in the so-called Big Beautiful Bill, and promote U.S. economic growth. So this is a matter of balance. It's a matter of balancing priorities. And interestingly enough, with this recent change in that's the motivation, by the way, when you think about it, with the agreement between European states and the United States for the United States to provide arms to Ukraine through European states who will purchase them from the United States. The economic demand will come from the European states purchasing weapons from the United States and then forwarding them to Ukraine. So that is one way of finessing the entire situation, so that the United States defense companies will then have an incentive. They will have customers, if you will, for buying this increased military production, because they know it's going to support Ukraine indirectly, and also support the Europeans' desire to provide for their own defense. Because remember, now a lot of these European countries are all agreeing to increase their share of defense spending up to 5% of GDP, rather than staying at 2 to 3%, as some had been doing for many years. So this is all a matter. It is not a haphazard effort on the part of the United States, but it is part of what I consider to be a balanced approach overall. So it remains to be seen how this is all going to work out, because after all, we're still just barely into the first 6 months of the Trump administration.
He just hit the 6 month mark and everything. Hey, Jonathan and Sasha, just really quickly, I've heard you talk about this decisive attack on Crimea for months, and all along those lines as I've been producing your show and everything. But I've been hearing a lot more about attacks from Ukraine on Moscow. Is there any possibility that there could be a decisive attack on Moscow that could end the war from the Ukraine and everything like that? Because I know it's a long way from Ukraine and the front line to Moscow, but these drones seem to be doing some impressive work in terms of getting to Moscow. So I just wondered, is there a possibility of a decisive attack on the ruling end of Russia, which is Moscow?
Well, Moscow can't surrender to drones. They can't surrender. They can't surrender to an airplane. The problem, what the air attacks and drone attacks on Moscow will do, however, is it affects Russia's political stability, internal stability, and it's bringing the real pain of the war, serving to bring the real pain of the war home into the Russian population, to convince the Russian population that they are not immune from this war, that Ukraine can make them pay a price. And that is the reason behind the Ukrainians increasing attacks with drones on Moscow. They want to increase the political price for Putin. And go ahead. Yes.
Well, but remember, if you're talking about the fall of Moscow, remember all these famous invasions, whether it's Napoleon or Hitler, although Napoleon actually took over Moscow for a little while, but that didn't change regime. It didn't result in a victory of either Napoleon or Hitler. And the only time when a country would fall, like it was in 1991, the demise of Soviet Union, it was the result of internal events,
right,
not somebody else's attacking and taking over Moscow or anything else. Right. So this is what I think, Jonathan, is awaiting Russia in the near future, because for Putin, the end of the war is much worse than continuation of the war with any result, because the end of the war means that there will be approximately 700,000 armed bandits coming from the front lines to Russia. When there are no works, there is no life. So what do you think these people are going to do to support themselves?
They're going to rob their own population.
Absolutely. That's what happened very recently in Kursk region, when Russian soldiers started to get over the territory from Ukrainians, and they started rob their own population and rape and everything else. That's what's coming. By the way, very interesting investigation was that rape is one actually very powerful Russian strategy. Even in Second World War, there were 2 million German women who were raped by Great Red Army soldiers, and that's continuing. By the way, the Russian-inspired Hamas during its attacks on October 7th, almost 2 years soon, they used rape as the one of their elements of dealing with the Israeli hostages. And they were raping women during the attack and after the attack, and the people who were already captured. And so what Russians are doing exactly, it's indication of what is awaiting Russian population once the 700 well-armed bandits who used to good salaries and had a relatively good life and could rob and rape Ukrainian civilian population. Now they will have nowhere to go to do the same in Russia.
The beast will begin devouring itself.
Yeah, exactly. Very well said, Jonathan. Excellent. So what can I say is that we're living in very interesting time. I'm almost anxious to see the latest development. I'm always reading one internet resource, Ukrainian Pravda, and actually they're available in both Russian and English versions, and Ukrainian, by the way, too. So sometimes it's like for the latest development, I don't necessarily read their analysis, but to be on top of the latest news, that's a pretty good source. By the way, for analysis, I'm listening to uh, Sergei Shvets, sorry, Yuri Shvets, and his Analytica. Also, I think they're making some English translation of his programs. I never heard English translation, but the Russian is a really good one, and he analyzes very thoroughly. He's very well informed. Through basically, he's doing a tremendous job. He and his team. They're going through all English newspapers, starting from the morning Sunday Times from Hong Kong, and all Europeans. And then, of course, he's going into American papers. He's quite objective. You may say that he's a somewhat anti-Trumpian commentator, but he is lately, actually, he applauds Trump for everything what he's doing, and rightly so. So probably if you're reading his most objective analysis, then it's quite impressive. I feel that I'm getting from it quite a lot. Okay, in any case, I would like to thank you, Jonathan and Mark, for today's program. And I will see you on Friday, same place, same time. Thank you very much, and glory to Ukraine,
God bless America.
and a little bit of Canada.
Oh yeah, don't ever forget Canada. Got to keep those people protected.
Thank you.
Keep Canada protected as well, and everything along those lines, no doubt about it. And
Even when they beat us in hockey, we still say still want to say God bless Canada. So
thank you very much. Bye bye, everybody. See you on Friday.
See you on Friday. I had a moment though.